I thought handing my husband a positive pregnancy test would be the happiest moment of our marriage. Instead, the force of his hand striking my face sent me crashing to the hardwood floor. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old and a forensic accountant. As I tasted blood in my mouth, I realized the man I loved cared more about a corporate merger than our unborn child. But his mother's reaction was even worse. Before I share how I burned their entire empire to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use sheer calculated silence to destroy the people who thought they broke you. The master bathroom of our Buckhead mansion was bathed in warm morning light, smelling faintly of Marcus's expensive cologne. I stood by the marble vanity, my hands trembling slightly as I held the small plastic stick with its two undeniable pink lines. For 3 years, Marcus and I had projected the image of the perfect Atlanta power couple. He was a highly successful investment banker, a proud Morehouse graduate with a smile that could charm any boardroom. I was a senior forensic accountant, a Howard University alumna who had built a fierce reputation for tracking missing assets. On paper, we were invincible. I genuinely believed that adding a child to our lives would be the ultimate completion of our shared dream. When Marcus walked into the bathroom adjusting his custom Italian silk tie, I turned to him with tears of joy brimming in my eyes. I held out the test. I waited for his face to soften, for him to pull me into his arms and tell me how excited he was. Instead, I watched his expression morph from casual impatience to absolute unadulterated rage. The transformation was so fast, so visceral, that I did not even have time to brace myself. His hand swung through the air with a vicious speed. The sharp crack of his palm against my cheek echoed off the marble walls. The sheer force of the blow knocked me off balance, sending me crashing hard onto the cold tile floor. Pain exploded across the side of my face, followed by a sharp ringing in my ears. I lay there in stunned silence, tasting the metallic tang of blood welling up where my teeth had bitten into the inside of my cheek. I looked up at the man I had married, searching for a trace of remorse. There was none. He stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes dark with fury. "Are you insane?" he screamed, his voice echoing violently in the enclosed space. Bradley and I are literally days away from closing the biggest hedge fund merger in Atlanta history with the senator's family. My entire future relies on projecting absolute unencumbered focus. I cannot be tied down to you and a crying baby right now. You are going to ruin everything. Before I could even process the magnitude of his betrayal, the heavy oak door of the bathroom swung wide open. Standing in the doorway was Gwendolyn, Marcus's mother. She was fully dressed in her Sunday best, a tailored suit, and a matching hat fresh from directing the church choir, where she presented herself as a pillar of morality. I reached out a hand, expecting at least a shred of maternal instinct or basic human decency from another woman. But Gwendolyn did not rush to my aid. She did not scold her son for striking his pregnant wife. She looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She calmly walked over to the mini fridge we kept near the vanity, pulled out a designer gel ice pack, and tossed it carelessly at my head. It hit my shoulder and slid to the floor. "When we pulled you out of that working-class neighborhood, you promised you would never be a burden to this family's legacy." She sneered, her voice dripping with venom and classist superiority. "We allowed you into our circle because you were quiet and worked hard. Now you want to trap my son right when he is about to enter the highest tier of society. Get rid of it. I will write you a check for $10,000 right now, and we will pretend this little mistake never happened." They did not wait for my response. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, stepped over my legs as if I were nothing but an obstacle, and walked out of the room with his mother. I could hear their footsteps retreating down the grand staircase, followed by the clinking of crystal glasses, as they poured themselves bourbon in the parlor, completely unbothered by what had just transpired. I did not cry. The initial shock had burned away, leaving behind a profound, icy clarity. The loving wife who had walked into that bathroom was dead. In her place was the ruthless forensic accountant who destroyed fraudulent empires for a living. I stood up slowly, pressing the cold pack to my swelling cheek. I walked into our massive walk-in closet and pulled down a single black duffel bag. I packed only the essentials. I did not take the designer clothes Marcus had bought me, nor the jewelry Gwendolyn had gifted me for photo opportunities. Before leaving the house, I made a crucial stop. Marcus kept a hidden wall safe behind a painting in his home office. He thought he was clever, but he was arrogant and predictable. The combination was the founding year of his college fraternity. I punched in the numbers, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside sat stacks of cash and a few luxury watches, but I ignored those. My target was the small, highly encrypted external hard drive tucked in the back corner. I slipped it into my bag, quietly exited the mansion through the side door, and got into my car. Sitting in the driver's seat a few blocks away, my hands flew across my laptop keyboard. I bypassed the basic encryption on Marcus's drive within minutes. What I found inside made the physical pain in my face pale in comparison to the financial violence on the screen. Deep within a nested folder was a commercial loan document for $5 million. It was secured against a shell company registered in Delaware. I scrolled to the bottom of the PDF, my eyes scanning the guarantor section. There, staring back at me, was my own signature. It was a flawless forgery. Marcus had not just assaulted me. He had weaponized my pristine financial record and professional credentials to secure massive illegal funding for a phantom project. The betrayal was complete, and my retaliation would be absolute. 3 days had passed since I walked out of that house. I received an invitation to a family dinner at the ancestral mansion framed by Gwendolyn as a necessary peace offering to smooth things over. I knew it was a trap, a calculated move to assess what I knew and bully me back into submission. I dressed meticulously in a conservative navy dress, applying just enough makeup to cover the fading bruise on my cheek. I needed them to believe they still had the upper hand. I needed them to feel completely comfortable in their arrogance. The dining room was an ostentatious display of old money aesthetics. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the long mahogany table laden with catered food. Sitting at the head of the table, occupying the seat of power, was Bradley. Bradley was 38 years old, a white crypto investor who had married Marcus's sister Jada. He carried himself with an insufferable smugness, operating under the delusion that his presence validated their family's status. As I quietly took my seat near the end of the table, Bradley swirled a generous pour of expensive scotch in his glass and looked at me with a deeply condescending smirk. "Look," Zuri Bradley began, his voice booming with unearned authority, completely ignoring the tension in the room. "We all know pregnancy hormones can make women emotional, but you are really acting out the angry black woman stereotype right now. In our tax bracket, wives need to learn to step back so the men can focus on building generational wealth. Marcus is under a lot of pressure. You need to swallow your pride, go back home, and stop threatening to ruin my hedge fund deal just because your ego got a little bruised." The sheer audacity of his microaggressions made my blood boil, but I kept my face entirely neutral. Jada, sitting next to him, dripping in Cartier bracelets that I knew she could not afford on her salary, eagerly chimed in to defend her husband. She looked at me with disdain, clearly desperate for Bradley's approval. "You really should be grateful," Zurijada said, waving a manicured hand. "Bradley's financial genius and generational wealth are the only things keeping this ancestral home afloat right now. You hit the absolute jackpot when Marcus decided to marry down. Do not act like you have the right to demand anything, let alone disrupt family business." I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump forward in a posture of complete defeat. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. I blinked hard until a single tear rolled down my cheek. "You are right," I whispered softly, my voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I am just so overwhelmed by the pregnancy. I am sorry for causing a scene. I will try to be more understanding of the pressure Marcus is under." Gwendolyn nodded approvingly from across the table, satisfied that the hierarchy had been restored and the lowly daughter-in-law had been put back in her place. But they had no idea what was happening beneath the heavy mahogany table. My phone rested silently on my lap, connected via a secure wireless tether to my forensic software suite, running on a remote server. While Bradley pontificated about his brilliant investment strategies, and Marcus ate his steak with smug satisfaction, I was actively intercepting the mansion's private Wi-Fi network. The security protocols on their home router were pathetically weak, a default password they had never bothered to change. Within seconds, I bypassed the admin portal. Once inside the network, I deployed a packet sniffer to capture the raw data flowing to and from Bradley's devices. I watched the green lines of code cascade across my hidden screen as I isolated the unencrypted text logs backing up to his cloud storage. I was systematically downloading his entire digital life while maintaining the facade of a weeping broken wife. The data parsing finished just as dessert was being served. I casually wiped my eyes with a linen napkin and glanced down at my screen to read the intercepted messages in real time. The reality of their financial situation was far worse than a simple forged loan. Bradley was not a wealthy crypto genius. The text logs revealed he was running a massive Ponzi scheme, desperately bleeding cash, and defrauding major investors across Atlanta. He had zero generational wealth. He was using Marcus's position at the investment bank to launder money and create fake asset portfolios. But the most devastating revelation came from a text thread between Bradley and Marcus sent just hours before the dinner. I read Bradley's message first. The SEC is asking questions about the offshore accounts. The Ponzi is collapsing. We need that $5 million loan cleared immediately before the audit. Marcus's reply followed. Do not panic. I already forged Zuri's signature on the guarantor forms. Once the funds clear, I am going to file for a unilateral divorce. Senator Vance promised to cover our deficit if I marry his daughter Victoria. I will leave Zuri with the $5 million debt, and she will go to prison for the fraud. It is the perfect exit strategy. I stared at the glowing text on my phone, my heart turning to absolute ice. Marcus was not just an abusive husband who wanted to avoid fatherhood. He was a cowardly criminal actively orchestrating a plot to frame me for federal wire fraud, saddle me with millions in debt, and send me to prison just so he could marry a white politician's daughter to save his own skin. He planned to sacrifice my life, my career, and our unborn child to cover up a Ponzi scheme run by his arrogant brother-in-law. I slowly locked my phone screen and slipped it into my purse. I looked up at the table. Bradley was laughing loudly at a joke Marcus had just told. Gwendolyn was smiling, oblivious to the fact that her precious son and prize son-in-law were federal criminals on the verge of total ruin. They thought they had successfully manipulated the quiet working-class girl into submission. They thought they had secured their scapegoat. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed a master forensic accountant the exact blueprint needed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. The heavy glass doors of my downtown Atlanta accounting firm swung open, and in walked Marcus. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, the exact one he wore when he wanted to project the ultimate image of the successful, untouchable investment banker. In his hands, he carried a massive bouquet of white orchids. They were beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of any real warmth. It was the perfect visual representation of our entire marriage. I sat behind my mahogany desk, keeping my posture relaxed and my face deliberately soft. Inside my heart was a block of solid ice. I knew exactly what he was doing here. After intercepting his text messages at Bradley's dinner party, I knew his master plan was to divorce me, frame me for federal wire fraud, and marry the senator's daughter to cover up his brother-in-law's collapsing Ponzi scheme. But Marcus thought I was just his compliant working-class wife who had gotten lucky when he chose to marry her. He had completely forgotten that I was one of the top forensic accountants in the state of Georgia. Marcus approached my desk with a practiced look of deep remorse on his face. He set the orchids down and sighed heavily, running a hand over his perfectly lined-up haircut. Zuri, he began, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. I have been out of my mind with guilt. The way I acted the other morning, the way my mother treated you, it was unforgivable. I was just so stressed about the hedge fund merger. Bradley has been riding me hard, and I panicked. But you are my wife. You are carrying my child. I want to make things right. I want to secure our future. I forced my eyes to well up with tears. I let my voice tremble just enough to sell the performance. You really hurt me, Marcus. Your mother told me I was a burden. She handed me an ice pack and told me to get rid of our baby. Marcus circled the desk and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his. He was pulling out all the stops, relying on that fraternity boy charm that had fooled half of Atlanta's elite. My mother is an old-fashioned woman who cares too much about high society politics. I already told her to back off. I am here to prove to you that I am committed to us. That is why I brought these. He stood up and pulled a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He placed a heavy stack of documents onto my desk. The cover page read end-of-year tax disclosures and trust formations. What is this? I asked, feigning confusion. Just standard corporate tax disclosures, he said smoothly, tapping the top page. Bradley needs these cleared before the end of the fiscal quarter so we can finalize the hedge fund merger. But more importantly, I had my lawyers draft up a comprehensive trust fund for the baby. I am putting a massive share of my new portfolio directly into an account that only you and the child can access. I just need your signature on these releases so the bank can process the asset transfers. It is my way of proving that you both come first. It was a masterful performance. If I were the naive woman he married 3 years ago, I would have signed without looking overwhelmed by his apparent generosity. But I was not that woman anymore. I reached out and pulled the stack of papers toward me. Let me just review the schedules, I said, casually flipping past the cover sheet. Marcus shifted his weight, a tiny crack in his calm facade. Zuri the courier is waiting downstairs. It is mostly standard legal boilerplate. Just sign the back pages and I will let you get back to work. I ignored him, my eyes scanning the dense blocks of text. Forensic accounting is not just about numbers. It is about identifying the negative space, the things people try to hide in plain sight. I did not bother reading the bold paragraphs. I went straight for the microscopic clauses buried in the addendums and the asset schedules attached to the back. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the trap. Hidden beneath layers of convoluted tax jargon was a unilateral divorce agreement. It was structured as a postnuptial asset division, heavily favoring him. But the real poison was in Schedule C. It was a complete, irrevocable transfer of assets. By signing this document, I would be legally transferring 100% of my forensic accounting firm, my client lists, and my personal savings into a Delaware shell company named Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings was the exact shell corporation Bradley was using to launder money for his Ponzi scheme. Marcus was not just trying to divorce me. He was tricking me into signing away my entire livelihood and legally anchoring my business to a massive federal crime. When the FBI inevitably raided Bradley, my signature would be on the documents connecting my firm to the stolen money. I would go to federal prison, and Marcus would walk away completely clean-free to marry his new wealthy bride. A cold thrill ran down my spine. The sheer audacity of his evil was breathtaking. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He brought a financial weapon into the den of a financial assassin. I looked up at him, letting a soft, grateful smile spread across my face. Marcus, this is incredibly generous. You really set up a trust for the baby. Of course I did, he lied flawlessly. I want to take care of my family. I opened my top desk drawer. Inside sat my favorite fountain pen. It was a sleek silver instrument I exclusively used for sensitive draft markups. It was filled with a highly specialized bio ink. To the naked eye, it looked like standard black ink, but it was chemically designed to fade completely and vanish without a trace within 24 hours of exposure to room temperature air. Furthermore, I did not sign my actual name. Years ago, when dealing with hostile corporate audits, I registered a specific legally voided signature with the Georgia Board of Accountancy. It was a slight variation of my name that automatically invalidated any contract it was applied to, serving as a silent distress signal for coerced documents. I uncapped the pen. I flipped to the signature pages. I signed the unilateral divorce decree. I signed the asset transfer. I signed every single trap he had laid for me, using the vanishing ink and the voided signature. Marcus let out a breath he had clearly been holding. His eyes gleamed with raw, predatory triumph. He quickly gathered the documents, tapping them on the desk to align the edges, treating them like a winning lottery ticket. He leaned down and kissed my forehead with Judas-like precision. Thank you, Zuri. I will get these filed right away. I will see you at home tonight. We can celebrate. He turned and walked out of my office, practically vibrating with excitement. He thought he had just won the game of a lifetime. He thought he had discarded his black wife, stolen her assets, and secured his path to a political dynasty. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. I looked down at the bustling Atlanta street below. A minute later, I saw Marcus emerge from the building. I turned back to my desk and opened the tracking software on my computer. I had cloned his phone's display output the night I packed my bags. On my screen, a new text message popped up. It was from Marcus, sent to a contact saved as Victoria Vance. The message read, "The idiot signed. I am officially free. I am all yours, baby." I let out a low, dark chuckle. The idiot had indeed signed, but not the way he thought. I sat back down in my leather ergonomic chair. I opened the encrypted folder on my desktop where I had stored all the data I intercepted from Bradley's home network. I compiled the offshore routing numbers, the Ponzi scheme ledgers, the text messages proving Marcus's complicity, and the forged $5 million loan documents bearing my fake signature. I packaged it all into a single, highly compressed file. I opened my secure email client and routed my connection through 3 different virtual private networks. I typed in the address for the encrypted tip line shared jointly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. I attached the file. I did not write a long emotional message. I simply typed subject evidence of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement at Apex Holdings. Key conspirators Bradley and Marcus. I moved my mouse over the send button. Marcus and his family had tried to bury me in the dirt to elevate themselves. They had mocked my background, insulted my intelligence, and plotted to destroy my future. Now they were about to learn what happens when you try to bury a seed that knows exactly how to grow in the dark. I clicked send. The trap was officially sprung. The satisfying click of my mouse sending the federal tip had barely registered when a sharp knock echoed on my office door. My assistant walked in carrying a velvet box secured with a thick satin ribbon bearing the logo of an exclusive Buckhead boutique. I dismissed my assistant and pulled the ribbon, expecting another pathetic peace offering from Marcus. Instead, I lifted the lid to find a scratchy neon green polyester dress that belonged in a discount bin. Tucked beneath the cheap fabric was a white business card with embossed gold lettering for a private medical clinic known exclusively among Atlanta elite for quietly terminating unwanted pregnancies. Before I could process the audacity of the package, my private office line rang. The caller ID flashed. Gwendolyn name. I pressed the speakerphone button, leaning back. "I see my gift arrived," Gwendolyn said, her voice dripping with that signature Southern condescension she usually reserved for the country club waitstaff. "I expect you to wear that cheap rag to pack up the rest of your things from the house today. We are hosting Marcus' official engagement party to the senator daughter next month, and I need the space for Victoria bridal gifts. Do not drag this out. Zuri, your kind simply does not belong in our bloodline." I stared at the framed Howard University diploma hanging proudly on my office wall. My mind flashed back to countless Sunday dinners where Gwendolyn would sit at the head of the table loudly praising Victoria Ivy League pedigree while shooting venomous glances at me. She spent 3 years making thinly veiled comments about how my natural locks were too unkempt for their pristine family photos. She constantly reminded the entire congregation that while they were a family of generational wealth, was just a scholarship girl from a working-class zip code who got lucky. She used her position in the church to mask her prejudice, always treating my blackness as something inferior. I did not yell. I did not justify my existence or beg for my humanity to be recognized. I simply reached out and ended the call. The dial tone echoed in my quiet office, a soothing hum of finality. Gwendolyn thought her cruelty would break my spirit and send me running back to my old neighborhood in shame. She fundamentally misunderstood what happens when you push a woman who has already survived the bottom. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a private encrypted number. A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Tell me the bait is set," Isaiah said. Isaiah was 40 years old, a former corporate prosecutor, turned ruthless, private investigator. He was the only person in Atlanta I trusted with my life, and the only man formidable enough to help me burn Marcus' empire to the ground. The bait was swallowed whole, I replied, my voice steady and cold. Marcus signed every single page with the vanishing ink. The unilateral divorce is officially in play, and the federal tip line just received the complete data dump on Bradley offshore Ponzi scheme. I heard a heavy lighter flicking open on his end of the line. Give the word Zuri. Cut their oxygen, I said. I hung up the phone and swiveled my chair toward my secondary monitor. As a senior forensic accountant, my firm possessed administrative access to the risk management portals of several financial institutions. Because Marcus was arrogant, he had insisted our firm monitor his family personal wealth portfolios to save money on accounting fees. He handed me the keys to his kingdom. I logged into the high-security portal using my biometric credentials. The screen populated with the glowing financial profiles of Marcus and his sister Jada. I clicked on Marcus' primary Black American Express account, the very card he used to fund his lavish lifestyle, his expensive hotel rooms with the senator daughter, and his illusion of untouchable power. I initiated a Level 1 security breach protocol. The system prompted me for a justification. I uploaded the $5 million commercial loan document I had extracted from his safe, the one bearing my forged signature. In the comments section, I typed a precise corporate directive. The primary account holder is currently under investigation for severe identity theft and wire fraud. Immediate asset freeze required pending federal audit. I hit submit. The status icon next to Marcus' black card instantly turned from a vibrant green to a flashing crimson red. I did not stop there. Jada had spent the morning texting me vile insults about how I should be grateful to walk away with nothing while she lived comfortably on Bradley. Generational wealth. I pulled up Jada, primary accounts. She shared joint liability on several credit lines directly linked to Bradley. Fraudulent shell companies. I applied the exact same identity. Fraud flag to her profile. I watched as her unlimited spending power was completely eradicated in the blink of an eye. The red warning banners multiplied across my monitor, locking down checking accounts, freezing international wire transfers, and suspending every line of credit. The digital guillotine had officially dropped. They were entirely cut off from the capital they used to terrorize everyone around them. They were bleeding out financially, and they did not even know they had been cut. I leaned back and took a deep breath. I knew exactly where Jada was right now. She had posted her location on social media less than an hour ago, bragging about a VIP shopping spree in Buckhead. I knew Marcus was probably sitting at an upscale steakhouse celebrating his fake divorce and impending engagement to a woman he was using for political leverage. I vividly imagined the paralyzing panic that was about to wash over both of them when the realization finally hit: the elite status they valued more than human life. The wealth they constantly used as a weapon against me was suddenly nothing but worthless plastic. I smiled, looking down at the trash can where I had thrown Gwendolyn's cheap dress and the abortion clinic card. The real cleanup was just getting started. The marble floors of the designer boutique in Buckhead clicked under the heels of the Atlanta elite. Jada stood at the checkout counter surrounded by 3 judgmental sorority sisters. A $15,000 crocodile handbag rested on the glass counter as if buying it was a casual errand. She flipped her sleek hair and handed the cashier her heavy metal black card with a look of utter boredom. The cashier swiped the card. A sharp negative beep echoed in the quiet luxury of the store. Jada scoffed and told the woman to run it again, claiming the machine must be broken. The cashier swiped it a second time. The screen flashed a bright red declined notification. Her friends immediately stopped talking. The silence became suffocating. Jada snatched the card back, her face flushing crimson, as the cashier politely informed her that the bank had flagged the account for identity fraud. The whispers among her wealthy friends started instantly. Jada bolted out of the glass doors, leaving the handbag, and furiously dialed Marcus. Marcus sat in a leather booth at a steakhouse celebrating his impending freedom when his phone vibrated. Jada screamed so loudly that executives at the next table turned to look. She shrieked about the humiliation, demanding to know why their funds were frozen. Marcus hung up and logged into his private banking app. Instead, his screen was covered in red warning banners. Every account was locked. Checking savings portfolios and international wire transfers all displayed a zero available balance. The federal fraud hold was absolute. Marcus did not process the legal danger yet. His arrogant mind jumped to the conclusion that I was playing a game of revenge. He thought he could bully me into unlocking the accounts, just like he had bullied me into shrinking my personality for 3 years. He threw a $100 bill on the table and stormed out of the restaurant, consumed by rage. I leased a high-rise apartment in Midtown using corporate accounts. I knew it would not take long for him to find me. I was sitting on my sofa sipping chamomile tea when the pounding began. Marcus kicked the front door with enough force to rattle the hinges. He screamed my name through the thick wood, his voice cracking with unchecked aggression. He yelled that he was going to break the door down. He promised to ruin my life if I did not reverse the bank hold immediately. He was out of control, fully intending to assault me again. I took a sip of tea and pressed a button on my coffee table. The locks clicked open. Marcus threw his weight against the door, expecting to find a terrified woman cowering in the corner. Instead, he slammed directly into what looked like a solid brick wall. Standing inside my foyer were 2 massive security contractors provided by Isaiah. They wore black suits and carried themselves with the calm of former military operatives. The larger man grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his suit and shoved him backward into the hallway with brutal force. Marcus stumbled and hit the opposite wall, gasping for air as his courage evaporated. The bodyguard stepped aside just enough for me to walk into the frame. I wore a silk robe, my pregnancy glow radiating an aura of untouchable power. I took another sip of my tea, looking down at the man who had struck me days ago. "Did you actually forget what I do for a living, Marcus?" I asked, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "You married a forensic accountant and then handed me the keys to your financial kingdom. Your accounts are not just temporarily locked. They are completely frozen under a federal fraud hold because of the $5 million loan you forged in my name." Marcus grabbed his chest, his eyes wide with sudden paralyzing realization. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I stepped slightly closer, letting my words strike him like physical blows. "The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are currently auditing your entire portfolio. They are tracking every single penny you and Bradley funneled through those offshore shell companies. You thought you could saddle me with your massive debt and send me to prison while you married into a political dynasty. Instead, you handed me the exact evidence I needed to dismantle your entire life piece by piece." Marcus dropped to his knees in the carpeted hallway. The arrogant investment banker who thought he was the smartest man in Atlanta was now weeping like a terrified child. He begged me to call the bank to tell them it was a misunderstanding. He swore he would cancel the divorce immediately and be a dedicated father. His pathetic desperation was absolutely sickening to watch. I just smiled and slowly shook my head. Before I could tell him that the federal wheels were already turning way too fast to stop, his cell phone rang loudly in the quiet hallway. The custom ringtone indicated it was his prospective father-in-law, the powerful state senator. Marcus scrambled to answer it desperately, hoping the politician was calling to offer a financial lifeline. I watched Marcus press the phone to his ear. I could hear the senator shouting through the receiver. The politician demanded to know what kind of monster he had almost welcomed into his family. An anonymous source had just emailed the senator a high-definition video file. It was the security footage from the hidden camera inside our master bathroom, the exact footage showing Marcus viciously slapping his pregnant wife across the face. The senator screamed that the engagement to his daughter was permanently canceled, and that if Marcus ever contacted his family again, he would personally ensure the police handled the brutal assault charges. The line went dead, leaving Marcus kneeling in the hallway staring at a black screen while his entire world burned to ashes. 2 weeks had passed since I left Marcus kneeling in my hallway staring at a black screen while his entire world burned to ashes. The total freeze on their assets had triggered a massive panic within their household, but instead of retreating, they doubled down on their delusions. Bradley was drowning. With his offshore accounts locked and the Securities and Exchange Commission circling like vultures, he needed fresh capital immediately to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat. If he failed to secure new investors, he was looking at decades in federal prison. Gwendolyn, completely blinded by her obsession with social status, refused to accept that her empire was crumbling. She convinced Bradley that they could charm their way out of bankruptcy. Their desperate solution was to host the annual Legacy Foundation Charity Gala at the Peachtree Elite Country Club. This was the crown jewel of Atlanta high society, a place where old money families, doctors, and prominent alumni from Spelman and Morehouse gathered to write massive checks. It was the perfect hunting ground for a scammer looking for a lifeline. I knew all about the gala because my forensic software was still actively monitoring their emails. I watched digital panic unfold as Bradley frantically tried to secure the venue. He sent forged bank letters and promised wire transfers to the country club management, begging for extra time to cover the exorbitant hosting fees. Jada was equally frantic. I read her text messages to her stylist crying because her credit cards were declining, and she had to secretly rent a designer gown under a fake name just to maintain appearances. They were throwing a lavish party on the edge of a cliff, hoping no one would look down. The night of the gala arrived with a crisp autumn chill. The country club ballroom was a masterpiece of crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and flowing champagne. The jazz band played softly in the corner, masking the heavy desperation sweating out of the hosts. Bradley darted between tables of wealthy black investors wearing a tuxedo that suddenly looked a size too big for him. He pitched his fake hedge fund with manic energy, laughing too loudly and gripping hands too tightly. Gwendolyn stood near the entrance, performing her role as the matriarch. She wore an aggressive smile, greeting politicians and judges, desperately pretending she was not seconds away from total financial ruin. They thought they had successfully locked the doors to their private fortress. They thought they were safe among the elite. They had absolutely no idea that I had already bought the castle. I stepped out of my chauffeur-driven Maybach at precisely 9 o'clock. I did not sneak in through the back. I walked right through the grand mahogany front doors. I was wearing a custom emerald green couture gown that draped perfectly over my growing baby bump. My natural hair was styled in an elegant crown, a direct defiance of every snide comment Gwendolyn had ever made about my appearance. I did not look like the compliant working-class girl they tried to bury. I looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield that she already owned. The moment I entered the grand ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. It started as a subtle ripple. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The clinking of crystal glasses slowed as the Atlanta elite noticed my arrival. I walked down the grand staircase with deliberate, measured steps. I caught the eye of a prominent judge I had previously consulted for a financial fraud case. He smiled and raised his glass to me. I was not an outsider here. In the professional world where real money was tracked and protected, my name commanded deep respect. Gwendolyn spotted me from across the room. The fake smile dropped from her face so fast it looked painful. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. She grabbed Jada by the arm, leaving fingernail marks in her skin, and marched straight toward me. Bradley, abandoning a conversation with a wealthy surgeon, scrambled closely behind them. They formed a frantic wall of panic, trying to block me from the view of their prospective victims. "What are you doing here?" Gwendolyn hissed, her voice trembling with rage as she tried to keep her tone low enough to avoid a public scene. "This is a private charity event for respectable families. Your kind does not belong here. You need to turn around and walk your ghetto, classless self out that door before I have you arrested for trespassing." Jada crossed her arms, glaring at my dress. "You are incredibly pathetic, Zuri. Marcus already filed the divorce papers. You showing up here pregnant and desperate is not going to win him back. Security is going to drag you out by your hair." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached out and took a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. I took a slow, deliberate sip, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my mother-in-law. You seem remarkably stressed for a woman hosting a charity gala, Gwendolyn. Perhaps you should focus on entertaining your guests instead of worrying about my presence. I hear your son-in-law is having a very hard time convincing anyone to invest in his imaginary portfolio tonight. Bradley's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "Listen to me, you crazy bitch!" he snarled, stepping dangerously close to my face. "I do not know how you got past the front gate, but you are leaving right now. You are ruining my networking event." Gwendolyn snapped her fingers aggressively in the air, signaling the general manager of the country club. The manager, a tall, stern man in a tailored suit, walked over immediately. Gwendolyn pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "Manager, I demand that you remove this woman from the premises immediately." Gwendolyn ordered, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden quiet of our corner. "She is an uninvited guest trespassing on my reserved floor. Call the police and have this trash thrown out onto the street where she belongs." The manager stopped. He did not look at me. He did not call security. Instead, he turned his gaze slowly toward Gwendolyn. His expression was completely devoid of warmth, reflecting the cold, hard reality of the situation. He clasped his hands behind his back and spoke with a booming clarity that carried across the nearest tables. "Ma'am, I cannot eject the host," he stated firmly. Gwendolyn blinked, her face contorting in confusion. "I am the host," she sputtered. "I booked this ballroom." The manager shook his head, his voice projecting perfectly into the silent room. "No, ma'am, you did not. Mrs. Zuri paid the $100,000 venue fee in cash an hour ago after your son-in-law wire transfer bounced for insufficient funds." The elite guests standing nearby overheard this and began whispering. The murmurs in the ballroom swelled into a deafening wave of gossip. I did not wait for Gwendolyn to scrape her jaw off the marble floor. I simply walked right past her frozen frame. My emerald gown swept against the polished tiles as I headed straight for the main stage. Bradley snapped out of his shock and lunged forward to stop me, but his expensive leather shoes slipped slightly on the freshly waxed floor. He was sweating profusely, his tuxedo suddenly looking like a straitjacket. I climbed the short velvet steps to the stage with the grace of a woman who held every single card in the deck. Bradley had left the primary microphone resting on the acrylic podium. I picked it up. The feedback whined for a split second, immediately silencing the jazz band in the corner and drawing the eyes of every single politician, surgeon, and real estate mogul in the room. I slowly tapped the microphone exactly twice. The sound echoed like a judge striking a gavel. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the ballroom. "I know the invitation stated we were gathering to raise capital for the Legacy Foundation, but there has been a slight change in the itinerary. Tonight, we are not raising money for charity. Instead, we are going to take a masterclass in forensic accounting." I looked up toward the audiovisual booth at the back of the room. Sitting behind the glass was one of Isaiah's most trusted private investigators, posing as the club technician for the evening. I gave him a subtle nod. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed instantly. The massive dual projector screens flanking the stage flickered to life. Instead of the usual slideshow of smiling children and foundation logos, the screens illuminated with high-definition spreadsheets, wire transfer logs, and offshore banking routing numbers. The collective gasp from the Atlanta elite was like music to my ears. I began to pace the stage, pointing to the brightly glowing financial numbers on the large screens displayed directly behind me. For the past 3 years, I announced projecting my voice to the furthest corners of the room. My husband Marcus and his brother-in-law Bradley have been selling you a vision of generational wealth. They promised you double-digit returns through a highly exclusive crypto hedge fund. But as a senior forensic accountant, I am here to show you exactly where your investments actually went. I clicked a small black clicker in my right hand, advancing the slide. The screen zoomed in on a specific transaction highlighted in neon yellow. "Dr. Henderson," I called out, finding the prominent cardiologist sitting at a front table. "Last month you transferred $500,000 into Bradley's Apex Holdings account. You believed you were funding a new medical technology startup. If you look at the screen, you will see that exact $500,000 was routed through a Delaware shell company, bounced through a Cayman's account, and deposited directly into a luxury car dealership in Buckhead. Your investment paid for the custom Bentley that Jada drove to this very charity event tonight. Dr. Henderson stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. He glared at Bradley, who was now backed against the edge of the stage, hyperventilating. I clicked the remote again. Another set of bank statements appeared. And Councilwoman Davis, I continued, seamlessly moving to my next target. Your campaign re-election funds. $300,000 of it was leveraged against a fake asset portfolio created by Marcus. My husband used his position at the investment bank to forge my signature and secure fraudulent loans to cover Bradley's massive losses. They have been running a textbook Ponzi scheme, using the hard-earned money of Atlanta's brightest black leaders to fund a lavish lifestyle of designer clothes, offshore trips, and country club memberships that they absolutely could not afford. The ballroom erupted. Guests were pulling out their phones, shouting at Bradley, demanding answers. Several men in expensive suits began advancing toward the stage, their faces twisted with fury. Jada was trying to hide behind a massive floral arrangement, her face buried in her hands, her rented designer gown suddenly looking like a prison uniform. My husband Marcus was nowhere to be seen near the front. He had cowered toward the back exit, trying to blend into the shadows. Bradley realized his entire life was over. The facade of the brilliant white investor saving the ancestral black family had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Cornered and panicking, he realized he could not charm his way out of raw banking data. He grabbed a backup microphone from the side of the stage. His face was a violent shade of purple, the veins popping in his neck. He completely lost his mind, dropping the polished country club persona and revealing the vile racist core he had kept hidden for years. "Do not listen to this crazy ghetto bitch," Bradley screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with pure desperation and unhinged fury. "It is her hormones. She is out of her mind. She is just a bitter, angry black woman making up lies because she cannot handle being in our tax bracket." The entire crowded ballroom gasped together in absolute unison. The racial slur hung in the air, a filthy stain on the elegance of the evening. The prominent black leaders in the room froze, staring at the man who had just taken their money and insulted their very existence. Gwendolyn looked like she was about to faint, her chest heaving as she clutched her pearl necklace. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to his slur. I maintained my absolute composure perfectly. I just smiled peacefully, reaching into the hidden pocket of my custom gown and held up a small audio remote, ready to deliver the final blow. I did not flinch when the racial slur echoed off the crystal chandeliers. I simply pressed the small silver button on my remote. The jazz band amplifier system had been entirely hijacked by my tech team. Instead of my voice, the crisp, high-definition audio file I had extracted from Bradley's phone blasted through the ballroom speakers. It was a voice memo he had sent to one of his offshore partners just 2 weeks ago. The room froze as Bradley's arrogant voice filled the space. "These Atlanta elites are so incredibly gullible," Bradley recorded. Voice sneered, dripping with unearned superiority. "You just wear a tailored suit, throw around some buzzwords like generational wealth, and they hand over their portfolios. And my wife family. They are the absolute dumbest stereotypes alive. I throw Gwendolyn a fake Black American Express card, and she literally bows down to me like I am her savior. It is pathetic. And Marcus? He is so desperate for white approval he would sell his own pregnant wife just to get a seat at the country club table. I own them." The audio clip ended with a smug chuckle that reverberated through the silent ballroom. The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. I watched Gwendolyn face from the stage. For 3 years she had placed this white man on an untouchable pedestal. She had paraded Bradley around the church congregation, acting as if his mere presence in their family elevated her above the rest of the black community in Atlanta. She had overlooked his blatant disrespect, excused his condescending remarks, and actively participated in tearing me down just to secure his favor. She believed he was her golden ticket to the highest echelons of society. Now she was forced to stand in front of the most prominent black doctors, judges, and politicians in the city and listen to her prized son-in-law call her a dumb stereotype who worshipped a piece of fake plastic. The soul-crushing humiliation was absolute. Gwendolyn's perfectly powdered face contorted into a mask of pure agony. The illusion of her superiority shattered into a million jagged pieces, cutting her to the bone. Marcus, who had been cowering near the exit doors, looked like he was going to vomit. His desperate quest for white validation had just been broadcast to every Morehouse and Spelman alumni in the room. He had sacrificed his marriage, his child, and his dignity for a man who viewed him as nothing more than a pathetic stepping stone. The paralyzing shock in the room suddenly snapped. Gwendolyn let out a blood-curdling scream that tore through her throat. It was not a scream of fear, it was the primal shriek of a narcissist whose entire identity had just been incinerated publicly. She lunged forward, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor, and threw her entire body weight at Bradley. She raised her hand and delivered a brutal open-palm slap directly across Bradley's face. The crack echoed almost as loudly as the audio recording had. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock as the woman who used to fetch his scotch now clawed at his tuxedo jacket. Jada completely lost whatever fragile grip on reality she had left. Her billionaire lifestyle, her Cartier bracelets, her entire self-worth were all funded by the man who had just admitted to despising her very existence. Jada let out a guttural sob and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crystal vase filled with imported white roses. She hurled it directly at Bradley's head. It missed him by inches and shattered violently against the marble pillar behind him, sending water and glass flying across the dance floor. That shattered glass was the starter pistol for absolute chaos. The gala devolved into a frenzy. Wealthy investors began shouting, demanding their money back. Jada grabbed another centerpiece and hurled it at the bar, screaming that her life was ruined. Gwendolyn was still swinging wildly at Bradley, who was now trying to physically push his mother-in-law to the ground to escape her manic attacks. Marcus was frantically pulling at the handles of the side exit doors, trying to flee the building before the mob of angry investors could reach him. The prominent guests who had arrived in evening gowns and tailored suits were now scrambling over overturned chairs, trying to distance themselves from the imploding family. Champagne flutes crashed to the ground as the crowd surged away from the violence. It was a spectacular display of ruin. Every single lie they had told, every ounce of fake prestige they had projected, was burning to ashes right in front of my eyes. I stood on the stage perfectly still, a calm island in the center of a raging hurricane. I rested my hand on my baby bump, feeling a strong kick against my palm. I smiled gently down at the madness unfolding below me. They had created this toxic ecosystem, and now they were drowning in it. They wanted to destroy my future, but they had merely handed me the matches to burn down their own. Suddenly, the heavy oak double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The shouting and the shattering glass came to an abrupt halt. The warm amber lighting of the country club was instantly overpowered by the harsh, blinding flash of red and blue lights cutting through the darkness from the courtyard outside. The silhouettes of heavily armed officers filled the wide doorway, casting long, imposing shadows across the ruined ballroom floor, marking the absolute end of the line. "Federal agents, nobody move!" A booming voice commanded over a heavy-duty megaphone. Dozens of tactical officers swarmed into the grand ballroom of the Peachtree Elite Country Club. The sheer force of their entry sent the remaining elite guests scrambling against the velvet walls. Women in custom couture gowns shrieked and dropped their clutch purses. Prominent Atlanta politicians, wealthy surgeons, and real estate moguls who had just been demanding their money back from Bradley now threw their hands in the air, terrified of being caught in the crossfire of a federal raid. The luxurious atmosphere was instantly replaced by the harsh, chaotic reality of a major criminal takedown. Bradley did not freeze. The moment he saw the block yellow letters printed across the dark tactical vests of the lead agents, he bolted. He shoved past a terrified waiter and sprinted toward the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. He was desperate, moving with the frantic energy of a cornered rat who knew his generational wealth facade was completely obliterated. He pushed through the swinging doors, knocking a towering tray of champagne glasses to the tile floor, where they shattered into thousands of pieces. He did not make it past the culinary prep stations. Two undercover federal agents who had quietly secured the rear perimeter tackled Bradley with brutal efficiency. The sickening thud of his body hitting the industrial stainless steel prep table echoed all the way back into the main ballroom. They slammed him face first onto the kitchen floor, pinning his arms painfully behind his back. The heavy zip ties clicked tight around his wrists, cutting off his circulation. The untouchable investor who had spent the last 3 years mocking black culture while simultaneously stealing black wealth was now eating dust on a greasy kitchen floor, completely neutralized. Back in the center of the main ballroom, Marcus was hyperventilating. His expensive tailored suit clung to his heavily sweating body. He watched in absolute horror as law enforcement agents began securing the room and interviewing the prominent guests he had defrauded. He looked wildly around the expansive space seeking an escape route but found none. Every exit was blocked by flashing lights and armed personnel. When an Atlanta Police Department detective and a senior federal agent began walking deliberately toward him, Marcus completely lost whatever dignity he had left. "Wait, stop," Marcus shouted, holding his shaking hands up and backing away until he bumped into a shattered crystal centerpiece. "You have the wrong man. I did not do this. It was Bradley. Bradley ran the entire offshore operation. I am just a vice president at the bank. He lied to me too. I am a victim here." The federal agent did not slow his purposeful pace. He unclipped the cold steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Marcus, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement." "I did not embezzle anything," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking in a pathetic display of sheer cowardice. "I am a Morehouse graduate. I am a respected investment banker in this city. I had no idea the offshore accounts were dirty. Ask my wife. My wife is Zuri. She is a senior forensic accountant. She is the one who secured the $5 million commercial loan for the holding company. Her signature is on the guarantor documents, not mine. She approved all the corporate asset transfers. If anyone committed financial fraud, it is her. Arrest her instead." A collective, disgusted gasp rippled through the remaining crowd. The absolute spinelessness of a man attempting to throw his pregnant wife into federal prison just to save his own skin repulsed every single person watching. Gwendolyn watched her son unravel, stepping back slowly, as if his cowardice was highly contagious. I stood on the stage, looking down at the pathetic creature I had once called my husband. I did not need to raise my voice to defend myself. I simply looked toward the front entrance and gave a slight acknowledging nod. Stepping out from behind the lead federal agent was Isaiah. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked purposefully across the ballroom floor. He carried a thick leather folio under his arm, projecting an aura of absolute legal devastation. Isaiah was not just my attorney and private investigator. He was a legal shark who thrived on tearing apart corrupt men like Marcus. "Actually, Marcus, that is entirely incorrect," Isaiah announced, his deep, commanding voice projecting effortlessly across the vast room. "Ms. Zuri reported the fraudulent commercial loan weeks ago to the Georgia Board of Accountancy and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Marcus shook his head frantically, sweat dripping rapidly from his forehead. "No, she signed it. The bank has the original physical documents. She signed the guarantor forms. I saw her do it with my own eyes." Isaiah opened his leather folio and pulled out a certified federal forensics report. He held it up for the arresting agents and the surrounding elite guests to see. "She did not sign anything, Marcus. You did. Ms. Zuri provided federal investigators with a time-stamped digital clone of your encrypted hard drive. We have the exact metadata proving you accessed the loan documents from your home office. Furthermore, the Federal Fraud Division ran a biometric handwriting analysis on the signature you submitted to the bank." Isaiah took a slow, deliberate step toward Marcus, closing the distance between them. "The biometric analysis proves conclusively that you forged her name. You are not a victim, Marcus. You are the sole co-conspirator on the wire fraud charges. You leveraged your position at the investment bank to facilitate Bradley money laundering, and then you actively attempted to frame your pregnant wife for the federal crimes." Marcus' face went completely ashen. The warm color drained entirely from his skin, leaving him looking like a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization that I had outsmarted him at every single turn finally crushed his arrogant spirit. He realized I had never been the naive working-class girl he thought he could manipulate. I had been building an airtight federal case against him from the exact second he struck me in our bathroom. The federal agent grabbed Marcus roughly by the shoulder, spinning him around forcefully. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, biting into his skin. The sharp metallic clicks echoed loudly in the quiet ballroom, finalizing his downfall. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, shoving Marcus forward. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus was violently marched through the center of the country club ballroom. The very people he had spent years trying to impress, the respected judges, the wealthy surgeons, the prominent black leaders, now watched him with absolute contempt. He had sold out his family, his community, and his soul for white approval and fake wealth. Now he was being paraded out in handcuffs, stripped of his prestigious title, his stolen money, and his freedom. As the officers dragged him toward the grand front doors, Marcus turned his head back toward the stage. His panicked eyes met mine one last time. There was no rage left in him, only a hollow, terrifying realization of his own permanent ruin. I did not blink. I kept my hand resting gently on my baby bump, standing tall and victorious in my emerald gown. I watched the heavy oak doors close behind him, sealing his fate and locking him out of my life and my child life forever. The sirens outside wailed loudly into the dark night. The reality of the massive raid shattered the illusion Marcus built around himself. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut behind him. The sheer terror of federal prison caused his legs to give out. The two imposing FBI agents dragging him stumbled slightly as Marcus allowed his body to go completely limp. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the sharp pain as his kneecaps slammed against the polished stone floor of the foyer. He thrashed wildly, trying desperately to turn back toward the ballroom. Isaiah and I stepped into the foyer to oversee his removal. Marcus saw me standing in my emerald gown and completely broke down. The facade of the arrogant, high-powered banker vanished into thin air. He was bawling uncontrollably with tears streaming down his face, ruining his custom tuxedo. He looked absolutely pathetic, a hollow shell of the man who used to strut through Atlanta elite circles looking down on anyone without an Ivy League pedigree. "Zuri, please," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with absolute naked desperation. "I love you. I am the father of your child. You cannot do this to me. Please tell them to stop. As your husband, you cannot testify against me in federal court." "Spousal privilege, Zuri. The law says they cannot make you take the stand against your own husband. We are a family. We can fix this." I stared down at him, feeling nothing but cold disgust. He was trying to leverage our unborn child, the same child he had violently slapped me for conceiving just weeks prior. The same child he coldly told his mother was a burden that would ruin his political aspirations. Now, suddenly facing a decade behind bars, this child was his ultimate lifeline. I raised my hand, giving a subtle signal to the federal agents. They paused their forward momentum, keeping their firm grips on his shoulders, allowing him to stay kneeling on the cold marble. I did not yell. I did not look angry. I walked over to where he was begging and looked down at him with a terrifying calm. Slowly, I knelt down, making sure I was perfectly at eye level with the coward who thought he could discard my life. "We are not married, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear, echoing softly in the vast empty foyer. Marcus stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second. His bloodshot eyes darted back and forth, searching my face in pure confusion. He frantically shook his head, stammering out a jumbled mess of words. He babbled uncontrollably about how we took our sacred vows at the biggest church in downtown Atlanta, how Gwendolyn happily paid for a massive ceremony, how the marriage license was officially and legally filed 3 years ago. "Do you remember the end-of-year tax disclosures you brought to my accounting firm last week?" I asked him, letting a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. "The thick stack of papers you claimed would secure a trust fund for our baby. As a senior forensic accountant, I actually read the microscopic fine print you hid so cleverly. It was not a tax document, Marcus. It was a unilateral divorce decree with an embedded post-nuptial asset transfer clause designed to steal my company and link me to Bradley Ponzi scheme. I watched the devastating realization slowly creep into his wide eyes. He knew exactly what he had tried to do, but his arrogant brain still believed he had won that round. He gasped, frantically telling me that I signed it. He swore he saw me sign the asset transfer. He bragged through his tears that he submitted the paperwork to the Fulton County Family Court himself. I did sign it. I confirmed, maintaining my terrifying calm demeanor. But I used a specialized bio ink for every single page related to the asset transfer and the financial disclosures. That specific ink is chemically engineered to vanish completely, without a single trace within 24 hours of hitting the paper. When the court clerk processed your expedited rush filing, they opened the folder to find a completely blank asset transfer schedule. But they did see my perfectly valid signature on the absolute divorce decree. I continued twisting the knife. I signed the divorce agreement using the legally voided signature variation I previously registered with the state board. The judge threw out your pathetic attempt to steal my company because those pages were blank, but they processed the divorce exactly as you requested. You divorced me, Marcus. The decree was officially finalized and stamped by the judge yesterday morning. I am no longer your wife. Marcus choked violently on his own breath, letting out a pathetic, strangled, wheezing sound. The legal loophole he thought he created to ruin my life was the exact trapdoor I used to sever all legal and financial ties to his sinking ship. I leaned in closer, so only he and the arresting agents could hear my final verdict. Because you finalized that divorce? I whispered, my tone dripping with finality. Spousal privilege does not apply to a legally divorced woman reporting her ex-husband for federal wire fraud. I am entirely free to hand the Federal Bureau of Investigation every single financial record you have ever touched. I gave them absolutely everything, Marcus. You have nowhere left to hide. The federal agents hauled Marcus up from the floor by his arms. He threw his head back and released a guttural, agonizing scream of pure defeat as they dragged him out through the heavy doors into the flashing police lights waiting in the driveway. However, the night of absolute reckoning was still far from over for this family. The grand doors of the ballroom burst open behind me, and Jada stormed out into the foyer, her face streaked with ruined mascara, ready to loudly demand that I fix the catastrophic mess I had just created. Her rented designer gown was soaked with spilled water from the flower vases she had thrown earlier in her manic rage. She marched straight toward me, pointing a manicured finger at my face. She completely ignored the federal agents securing the perimeter and the flashing lights illuminating the driveway. In her deeply delusional mind, she still believed she was the golden child of Atlanta high society, and I was just the hired help obligated to clean up her messes. "Zuri, you need to call your bank right now," Jada screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast marble foyer. "You need to wire the bail money for Bradley and Marcus immediately. You have the funds. Do not stand there acting like you are better than us. You owe this family. We took you in when you had absolutely nothing. We elevated you. We gave you access to our country club and our network. You are going to fix this and get my husband out of that police car before the media gets hold of the arrest records." I looked at Jada with profound pity. She was 30 years old, but she was throwing a temper tantrum like a spoiled toddler who had just dropped her ice cream cone. For 3 years, she had treated me like dirt under her expensive shoes. She had endlessly mocked my degree from Howard University, claiming her Spelman connections made her intellectual royalty. She had flaunted her Cartier bracelets in my face, bragging about Bradley and his generational wealth, while making snide remarks about my working-class roots. She had built her entire personality around being a rich white man pampered wife. I did not flinch or back away from her pointing finger. I simply held out my hand. Isaiah, who was standing silently at my side, reached into his leather folio and handed me a silver tablet. I unlocked the screen and pulled up a highly detailed federal financial report. I held the tablet up so the bright screen was mere inches from Jada's tear-stained face. "I am not writing a check for anyone, Jada," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "And you really need to stop worrying about your husband bail money because you have a much bigger problem on your hands. I want you to look very closely at the screen." Jada squinted at the tablet, her chest heaving with indignant breaths. Her eyes darted across the digital documents. I watched the arrogant fire in her expression flicker and die, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Do you recognize those corporate filings, Jada?" I asked, stepping slightly closer. When Bradley set up Apex Holdings and the other offshore shell companies to run his Ponzi scheme, he needed a primary shareholder. He told you he was making you the chief executive officer of his new real estate ventures, so you could impress your superficial friends. But he did not do it because he loved you, Jada. He did it to create a human shield. Bradley did not sign a single federal tax document. He forged Marcus' name for the banking side, and he legally registered every single fraudulent shell company directly under your social security number. Jada shook her head frantically, backing away from the tablet as if it were a venomous snake. "No, you are lying," she stammered, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Bradley manages all the money. I just sign the papers he gives me for the tax breaks. He told me it was just for the tax breaks." I tapped the screen, bringing up her personal credit report alongside the federal indictment summary. "The federal government does not care about your marital arrangements," Jada, I stated coldly. "The federal government cares about whose name is on the fraudulent corporate charters. You are legally registered as the sole proprietor of a criminal enterprise. You are personally and legally responsible for the $12 million in investor restitution. You are not going back to the country club, Jada. You are going to federal court." Jada's legs buckled beneath her. She grabbed the edge of a nearby marble console table to keep from collapsing onto the floor. The staggering weight of $12 million in debt crushed the air right out of her lungs. Her entire identity was tied to her wealth and her status. She suddenly realized that the sports cars she drove, the mansion she lived in, and the designer clothes she wore were all purchased with stolen money. And because her name was on the accounts, she was going to take the fall for all of it. Bradley had played her for an absolute fool. "No, no, no," Jada repeated, hyperventilating. "We are a prominent family. We have lawyers. My mother will hire the best defense team in Georgia. We will fight this." Before I could explain to her that Gwendolyn was equally bankrupt, the heavy front doors of the country club swung open again. 3 agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters IRS printed in bold yellow across their backs walked into the foyer. They were flanked by an Atlanta police officer. The lead agent, a stern woman with a clipboard, walked purposefully toward our group. She bypassed me and Isaiah entirely and stopped directly in front of Jada. "Jada Bradley?" the agent asked, consulting her clipboard. Jada nodded slowly, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "Ma'am, I am Special Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." The agent announced, her voice projecting absolute authority. "We have a federal warrant for the immediate seizure of all assets purchased with funds linked to Apex Holdings. Our agents are currently impounding the vehicles registered to your name in the valet parking lot. We are also instructed to seize any high-value jewelry or accessories currently in your possession, as they are considered proceeds of a federal crime." Jada gasped, clutching her chest. She looked down at the heavy gold Cartier bracelet stacked on her wrists and the brilliant diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The items she had used just hours ago to mock my financial status were now state evidence. "You need to remove the jewelry, ma'am," the IRS agent instructed, holding out a clear plastic evidence bag. "Right now. If you refuse, we will have the local authorities remove them for you." The ultimate humiliation settled over the foyer. The prominent black socialite who had dedicated her life to looking down on working-class women was now being stripped of her fake wealth in the lobby of her precious country club. Tears streamed down Jada's face as her trembling fingers reached up to unclasp the diamond necklace. It slipped from her neck and dropped into the plastic bag with a pathetic clink. She unhooked the Cartier bracelets one by one, her sobs echoing loudly in the quiet space. The IRS agent sealed the bag with cold efficiency, leaving Jada standing there completely stripped bare, her entire arrogant identity erased in a matter of seconds. The IRS agent sealed the plastic evidence bag with a sharp zip that echoed in the cavernous foyer. Jada stood frozen, her bare neck and wrists looking violently empty. She did not scream or fight anymore. The sheer magnitude of her $12 million federal debt had completely paralyzed her vocal cords. Two local officers escorted her out the side doors, not in handcuffs yet, but treating her like a suspect who was no longer permitted on the premises. The remaining elite guests had vanished into the Atlanta night, fleeing the toxic fallout of the evening. The valet parking lot was completely clear, save for the tow trucks hauling away Bradley's fleet of luxury vehicles. The opulent Peachtree Elite Country Club, which had been bustling with high society just an hour ago, was now an absolute ghost town. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of catering staff nervously sweeping up shattered crystal in the background. I stood near the grand entrance, my posture relaxed, breathing in the fresh autumn air filtering through the open double doors. Isaiah stood quietly a few paces behind me, giving me the space I needed to finish this. Then I heard the slow, dragging sound of designer heels scraping against the marble floor. I turned to see Gwendolyn emerging from the shadows of the ruined ballroom. She was a harrowing sight. The formidable matriarch who had spent the last 3 years making my life a living nightmare was completely unrecognizable. Her perfectly sprayed hair was disheveled. Her posture, usually rigid with unearned superiority, had collapsed entirely. She looked frail, ancient, and thoroughly defeated. The white son-in-law she had worshipped, the man she had elevated above her own community, had just publicly humiliated her and destroyed her family name forever. Her golden son, Marcus, was sitting in a federal holding cell entirely due to his own greed. Gwendolyn stopped a few feet away from me. She did not sneer. She did not raise her chin or attempt to assert dominance. For the first time since I met her, she looked at me not as a subordinate working-class girl, but as the absolute victor in a war she had foolishly started. Zuri, Gwendolyn began, her voice cracking painfully. It sounded like sandpaper rubbing against dry wood. I was wrong. I did not offer a sympathetic smile. I did not step forward to comfort her. I simply waited, knowing that a narcissist apology is never a genuine reflection of remorse. It is always a transaction, a desperate pivot to secure a new source of survival. I was entirely blinded by the prestige. Gwendolyn continued, wringing her bare hands together. I let Bradley convince me that his way was the only way to secure our legacy. I pushed Marcus to follow him. I was so terrified of losing our status that I allowed them to tear this family apart. I treated you terribly, Zuri. I treated you like an outsider when you were the only one who actually possessed any real integrity. She took a shaky step closer, her eyes dropping to my swollen belly. The sight of her looking at my child sent a protective surge of adrenaline through my veins. I have lost my son, she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes and ruining her expensive makeup. Jada is facing federal prosecution and absolute bankruptcy. My reputation in this city is completely incinerated. I cannot show my face at the church. I cannot walk into my social clubs. I have absolutely nothing left, Zuri. But I am begging you to show me a mercy I never showed you. I remained perfectly still. What do you want, Gwendolyn? I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. The ancestral mansion in Buckhead. She sobbed, clutching the fabric of her expensive gown. It has been in our family for 4 generations. It is the cornerstone of our history in Atlanta. Bradley convinced me to leverage the deed to secure a bridge loan for his hedge fund last month. He promised me he would pay it back tenfold. But the bank called the loan today. They are going to foreclose on the property tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. They are going to put the house up for public auction. I will be homeless by the weekend. She dropped to her knees right there on the country club floor, the ultimate surrender of a woman whose pride had been her only religion. Please? Zuri, Gwendolyn pleaded, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. You are wealthy now. You have your successful accounting firm. You clearly have significant capital. I know you hate me, but please think about the baby. Think about your child. That mansion is your baby heritage. It is the legacy of their ancestors. Please buy the house from the bank. Pay off Bradley loan and save our home. You can put it in a trust for the baby, but just let me stay there. Do not let them throw me out onto the street. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize publicly. Just save the house. I looked down at the woman kneeling before me. I remembered the day she threw an ice pack at my bruised face and told me to get rid of my child for $10,000. I remembered the cheap neon dress and the abortion clinic business card she had sent to my office just weeks ago, accompanied by a cruel voicemail declaring my bloodline was too inferior for her pristine family. Now she was invoking the very child she had tried to erase using my baby as a convenient prop to secure a roof over her own head. Her hypocrisy was not just offensive, it was entirely predictable. I slowly unclasped the lock of my custom designer clutch. I reached my hand inside, feeling the crisp edges of the heavy legal paper I had prepared specifically for this very moment. I pulled out a folded document bearing the official raised seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I walked over to a nearby cocktail table that had survived the ballroom chaos. I placed the document down and slowly smoothed out the creases until it lay perfectly flat against the glass surface. I looked Gwendolyn dead in the eyes, and I slid the crisp, notarized property deed directly across the table toward her trembling hands. Gwendolyn snatched the heavy parchment from the glass surface as if it were a life raft floating in the middle of a freezing ocean. Her manicured fingers shook violently as she held the document up to the dim light of the ruined country club foyer. I watched the tension melt from her shoulders. The deep wrinkles of sheer panic that had aged her face over the last hour instantly smoothed out. She let out a wet, gasping breath that sounded like a prayer of salvation. "Oh, Zuri," she wept, pressing the deed against her chest. "I knew you had a good heart. I knew you would not let our family legacy be destroyed by that white con artist. The Lord works in mysterious ways. You saved the Buckhead mansion. You saved the very foundation of our ancestry in Atlanta. I promise you I will make this right. You and the baby will always have a place at my dining table. I will even host the baby shower in the grand parlor. We can forget all this ugliness and start over as a real family." Her sudden shift from a vicious classist tyrant to a fawning grateful mother-in-law was enough to make my stomach turn. For 3 years she had used that exact same Buckhead mansion as a physical weapon to remind me of my place. She used to host lavish Sunday brunches in that grand parlor, explicitly instructing the caterers to serve me last. She used to walk me through the ancestral hallways, pointing at the oil paintings of her Spelman-educated grandmothers, loudly lamenting that Marcus had polluted their pristine bloodline by marrying a girl from a working-class neighborhood. She wielded that house like a crown. Now she was offering me a temporary guest pass to my own property, just to save her pride. I kept my hands folded neatly over my clutch. I did not return her desperate smile. "Read the document, Gwendolyn," I instructed, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "Read the name listed under the primary ownership entity." Gwendolyn wiped the tears from her cheeks, leaving streaks of ruined makeup across her face. She lowered the parchment and squinted at the bold legal print, stamped by the Fulton County clerk. Her eyes scanned the dense paragraphs of the property transfer. I watched her gaze hit the second page. Her breathing stopped entirely. The triumphant relief on her face morphed into a mask of pure, utter confusion. "Corp LLC," she read aloud, her voice wavering. "What is Z Corp LLC, Zuri? Did you put the house in a corporate trust for the baby? Is this a tax shield you set up to protect the estate from the federal investigators?" I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, closing the physical distance between us. The scent of her expensive floral perfume mixed with the sour smell of her nervous sweat. "Corp LLC is my private real estate holding company," I explained, letting every single syllable land with heavy precision. "It is an entity I established before I ever met your son to protect my forensic accounting assets. I did buy the house, Gwendolyn, but I did not buy it from Bradley, and I certainly did not pay off his fraudulent loans to save your credit score." Gwendolyn stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "I do not understand," she stammered. "If you did not pay off the bridge loan, how do you have the deed?" Because Bradley missed his final margin call 3 days ago, I stated, laying out the financial execution with clinical detachment. When the offshore accounts began collapsing last week, he stopped making the interest payments on the mansion. The bank immediately triggered the default clause. They foreclosed on your precious ancestral home on Wednesday morning. Your beloved son-in-law intercepted the bank notices so you would not find out before this ridiculous charity gala. The bank put the property up for a private expedited commercial auction on Thursday afternoon. My holding company swooped in and bought the entire estate in cash for absolute pennies on the dollar. Gwendolyn swayed on her feet. The reality of her total dispossession was crashing down on her. The bank had taken the house. Bradley had hidden the foreclosure. I had swooped in and purchased her entire identity at a steep discount. "But you bought it," she reasoned, her voice pitching higher, completely saturated with delusion. "You bought it so the bank would not take it away from us. You used your company to keep the property in the family." "Thank you, Zuri. I know I do not deserve it, but thank you." She stepped forward, throwing her arms open. She actually tried to pull me into a tight embrace to hug me as a gesture of profound gratitude. I took a swift, sharp step backward, completely rejecting her physical touch. Her arms grasped nothing but empty air. She stumbled slightly, looking at me like a wounded animal. "You misunderstand, Gwendolyn," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute calm. "I did not buy that mansion for you. I did not buy it to preserve your fake high society legacy. I did not buy it so you could continue hosting your hypocritical church friends in a grand parlor while treating service workers like dirt." Her arms fell limply to her sides. "Then why did you buy it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the police sirens outside. "I bought it so I could have the absolute pleasure of legally evicting you from it," I said. I reached into my designer clutch one final time. I pulled out a crisp, bright yellow legal document printed on official Fulton County Sheriff Office letterhead. I held it out to her. It was a formal 24-hour notice to vacate the premises. "You called my bloodline inferior," I reminded her, letting the full weight of her past cruelty echo in the quiet foyer. "You handed me a business card for an abortion clinic and told me to erase my child because I was not good enough for your son. You looked down on my Howard University degree and mocked the neighborhood that built my resilience. You built your entire identity on the illusion of superiority anchored by that house." I pressed the yellow eviction notice directly against the property deed she was still clutching in her hands. "Now you have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags," Gwendolyn, I commanded. "By tomorrow night, my private security team will change the locks on the Buckhead mansion. If you or Jada are still on the property when the sun goes down, they will physically drag you out and throw your belongings onto the street where everyone in Atlanta can watch." Gwendolyn stared at the bright yellow eviction notice, as if the paper itself were coated in lethal poison. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug into the heavy parchment, crumpling the pristine edges. The absolute reality of the 24-hour deadline hit her like a speeding freight train. She looked wildly around the empty, ruined foyer of the country club, hoping someone would step out of the shadows to tell her this was just a cruel joke. But there was no one left to save her. Her elite friends had abandoned her the second the federal agents arrived. Her white son-in-law had mocked her existence on a hot microphone. Her golden son was sitting in the back of a squad car headed to a federal holding cell. There was only me standing over her with absolute unyielding authority. "You called my bloodline inferior," I reminded her, keeping my voice terrifyingly steady. "You sat at the head of your formal dining table and told your church friends that my working-class background was a disease that would infect your pristine family tree. You sent a courier to my downtown accounting firm with a cheap neon dress and a business card for a discreet abortion clinic. You looked me in the eye and ordered me to erase my unborn child because I was simply not good enough for your son." Gwendolyn visibly flinched at the recitation of her own vile actions. I leaned down, forcing her to meet my unwavering gaze. "You thought your stolen mansion and your country club memberships gave you the right to play God with my life. Now you have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags before my private security team throws your designer luggage onto the street." Gwendolyn began to hyperventilate. Short, ragged gasps of air tore through her throat as the panic fully set in. "Zuri, please," she wheezed, her voice completely stripped of its former haughty arrogance. "How are we supposed to survive? Jada has absolutely nothing. I have nothing. The bank froze my retirement accounts when they locked down Bradley assets. We do not even have money for a cheap hotel room. Where are we supposed to go? I stood back up and smoothed the front of my emerald couture gown. I promised myself I would never let another woman in my family suffer the indignity of poverty. I said, my tone dripping with a chilling, calculated politeness. I am a firm believer in pulling oneself up by the bootstraps, exactly like you always preach to the working-class families at your holiday charity drives. So I brought you a practical solution. I opened my designer clutch one final time. I reached past my car keys and my cell phone, pulling out a freshly printed stapled packet of standard corporate paperwork. I dropped the packet directly onto the glass table right next to her eviction notice. Gwendolyn stared at it, her tear-filled eyes scanning the bold black letters across the top of the page. It was a blank employment application form for the Z Corp Commercial Cleaning Division. Since you and Jada are going to need to pay off that $12 million federal restitution, I explained smoothly, my company is currently hiring late-night janitors for our downtown office buildings. The starting pay is standard minimum wage with 0 corporate benefits, and the shifts run from midnight to 6 in the morning. Gwendolyn looked at the application and then looked up at me in absolute, unadulterated horror. You want me to scrub toilets? Me. I was the president of the Atlanta Heritage Society for 5 consecutive years. I cannot do manual labor. I have bad knees, Zuri. You will do whatever it takes to keep yourself out of a federal prison cell, I countered sharply, cutting off her pathetic excuses. Jada is the sole proprietor of a massive criminal enterprise. You actively participated in hiding those stolen assets inside your ancestral home. When the federal judge orders heavy wage garnishments to repay the black investors your family defrauded, you are going to need a verifiable source of legal income. You always bragged about how hard your ancestors worked to build your family name. Now it is your turn to put in the actual physical labor. I expect the floors in my corporate lobbies to shine exactly as bright as your fake pearls. Gwendolyn reached up with a trembling hand and grabbed the string of pearls around her neck. The pearls she wore like a badge of honor, the ones she claimed were a priceless family heirloom, were nothing but high-quality replicas purchased to maintain a facade of generational wealth. I had known they were fake since the very first day I met her. Now the illusion was entirely shattered for everyone to see. No. Gwendolyn sobbed, her hands shaking violently as she clutched the fake pearls. You cannot do this. You are a monster. You are tearing a respected Atlanta family to shreds just to satisfy your own bitter vengeance. I did not tear anything apart, I stated, my voice echoing with quiet, devastating finality. I simply held up a mirror and forced you to look at the reflection. You built a massive house of cards on the backs of stolen money, racial self-hatred, and pure arrogance. Gravity did the rest. Gwendolyn let out a gut-wrenching wail. Her knees finally gave out completely beneath her. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor of the country club foyer, her expensive rented gown pooling around her in a pathetic heap. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The powerful, terrifying matriarch of the Atlanta elite was completely gone. In her place was a broken, bankrupt woman weeping over a minimum wage janitorial application and a 24-hour eviction notice. She clawed at the floor, begging for a mercy she had never once extended to anyone else in her entire life. I looked down at her one last time. There was no pity in my heart, no lingering sense of obligation, and absolutely no regret. I had survived their emotional abuse, their financial sabotage, and their vicious attempts to erase my child. I had turned their own toxic weapons against them and reclaimed my absolute power. I turned my back on the sobbing woman on the floor. Isaiah stepped smoothly into stride beside me, carrying his thick leather folio. We walked together toward the grand exit of the country club without ever looking back. The heavy, ornate double doors stood open, framing the cool, dark Atlanta night, and the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser still processing the crime scene in the driveway. I stepped across the threshold, breathing in the crisp autumn air deeply. Behind me, the massive oak doors of the Peachtree Elite Country Club swung shut. They connected with the heavy brass latch, closing with a resounding, thunderous thud that echoed into the night, signifying the absolute and permanent end of my victimhood. 3 weeks passed since the heavy oak doors of the country club sealed the fate of the family that tried to destroy me. I stood in my newly renovated corner office in Midtown Atlanta, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The skyline glittered in the crisp morning light, a sharp contrast to the dark and decaying empire I had just dismantled. My forensic accounting firm had doubled its square footage, and my client list was overflowing. The wealthy investors who had narrowly escaped Bradley's fraudulent scheme pulled their portfolios from their previous firms and brought their business directly to the woman who had saved them. I was no longer just a successful accountant. I was the apex predator of Atlanta Financial District. I walked over to my custom marble desk and picked up the remote control. I clicked on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. The local morning news channel was broadcasting live from the steps of the federal courthouse. The glowing graphic at the bottom of the screen read, "The Country Club Crypto Crash," in bold red letters. The scandal had consumed the city, completely dominating the airwaves and high society gossip blogs for 21 consecutive days. A polished news anchor stared seriously into the camera, detailing the spectacular downfall of Bradley Offshore Hedge Fund. According to the federal indictment, the anchor announced, Bradley orchestrated a massive Ponzi scheme specifically targeting affluent Black professionals in the metro Atlanta area. The entire operation was exposed when an anonymous whistleblower submitted a heavily encrypted file containing raw banking data and forged loan documents directly to the FBI. I took a slow sip of my herbal tea, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The anonymous whistleblower narrative was the perfect shield. The federal agents knew my identity, but the public only knew that a brilliant shadow operator had taken down the biggest fraud ring of the decade. I watched the television screen flash a photograph of Bradley being escorted into a transport van, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The arrogant crypto bro who had mocked my intelligence and weaponized his whiteness to manipulate my mother-in-law was now facing 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The broadcast seamlessly shifted to Marcus. A new graphic appeared displaying the sleek corporate logo of his former investment banking firm. The anchor read directly from a press release issued by the bank board of directors. The firm publicly and absolutely disavowed Marcus, terminating his employment retroactively and stripping him of all accumulated stock options. The statement was ruthless. They threw Marcus under the bus with breathtaking speed, claiming he acted as a rogue agent who abused his position to facilitate wire fraud. His entire professional identity, the Morehouse degree, the prestigious title, the corner office he bragged about at every family dinner, was completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. He was permanently banned from the financial industry. The social fallout was just as devastating as the financial ruin. I switched channels to a popular local talk show. The hosts were tearing into Gwendolyn and Jada with absolute precision. The prominent Black socialites who used to attend Gwendolyn's lavish Sunday brunches had completely ostracized her. The church board held an emergency meeting and formally asked Gwendolyn to step down from her position as the choir director, citing the profound embarrassment her family brought upon the congregation. Jada was faring no better. Paparazzi had captured photos of her crying in the parking lot of a discount motel, her designer luggage stuffed into the back of a rented economy car. The women who used to covet Jada Cartier bracelets were now laughing at her bankruptcy filings on social media. They were social pariahs, exiled from the very community they had spent their entire lives trying to dominate. I muted the television, letting the silence of my beautiful office wash over me. I rested my hand on my belly, feeling my baby kick strongly against my palm. "We are safe now," I whispered, smoothing the fabric of my tailored maternity suit. I had protected my child from a bloodline of toxic narcissists, and I had secured our financial future permanently. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. The sharp ringing of my private desk phone shattered the quiet peace of the room. It was not my standard business line. It was the emergency direct line that I only gave to my lawyer, Isaiah, and a few high-clearance federal contacts. I walked over to the desk and glanced at the caller identification display. The screen did not show a name. It displayed an automated incoming alert from the Fulton County Jail. My heart maintained a steady, even rhythm. I did not panic. I simply pressed the speakerphone button and waited. An automated robotic voice filled the office. You have a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Fulton County Correctional Facility. To accept this call, press 1. I pressed the 1 key on my keypad. The line clicked, and a loud burst of static hissed through the speaker, followed by the distinct echoing background noise of a crowded cell block. Zuri, a voice croaked through the receiver, sounding desperate and utterly broken. Zuri, please do not hang up the phone. It was Marcus, the golden boy of the Atlanta elite, the man who had slapped me across the face and tried to frame me for a federal crime, was now calling me collect from a concrete cage. His voice lacked any trace of the smooth, arrogant investment banker who had tried to steal my company. He sounded completely terrified, his breathing shallow and erratic, like a man drowning in a very dark ocean. He was calling the woman he had tried to destroy, begging for a lifeline. I held the receiver to my ear, listening to the ragged, desperate breathing on the other end of the line. The heavy static of the Fulton County Correctional Facility telecommunications system crackled loudly in the background. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. I simply sat back in my custom ergonomic leather chair, running my fingertips over the smooth, cool surface of my pristine marble desk. I looked out at the sprawling, vibrant skyline of Atlanta, a city I was currently conquering, while the man on the phone was securely locked inside a concrete cage right in the middle of it. Zuri, please say something. Marcus finally choked out, his voice trembling so violently he sounded like a frightened, helpless child. Please tell me you are there. I know you are listening. I am here, Marcus. I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotional warmth. I am sitting in my newly expanded corner office, looking at a very bright and lucrative future. Where exactly are you sitting right now? A wet, pathetic sob tore through the phone speaker. He was crying again. The invincible investment banker, the Morehouse golden boy who used to wear custom-tailored Italian silk suits and drink expensive aged bourbon while openly mocking my working-class roots, was now reduced to absolute weeping misery. It is a complete nightmare, Zuri. He gasped, his words tumbling out in a frantic, rushed panic. It is an absolute living hell in here. You have no idea what they are doing to me. The cell block is freezing cold. The noise never stops. People are screaming and slamming metal doors all night long. I have not slept a single hour in days. The food is inedible sludge. They strip me out of my clothes and force me into this cheap, scratchy orange jumpsuit. The guards treat me like dirt. The other inmates look at me like I am just a piece of meat. I do not belong in a place like this. I am an educated man. I am a senior banking executive. I am a prominent citizen of Atlanta high society. I cannot survive in this cage. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my herbal tea, enjoying the soothing warmth spreading against my throat. You are not a banking executive anymore, Marcus, I reminded him with surgical precision. The board of directors completely disavowed you. They fired you retroactively and seized all your accumulated stock options. Your Grand Corner office was cleared out by security 2 weeks ago. You are currently an unemployed federal inmate, awaiting trial for massive wire fraud and money laundering. I highly suggest you get comfortable in that scratchy orange jumpsuit, because you are going to be wearing it for a very long time. No, Zuri. Listen to me. He begged, his voice pitching higher in sheer terror. You have to help me. You have to get me out of here. The judge denied me bail because of the massive flight risk associated with Bradley offshore accounts. I am stuck in this maximum security block and my lawyer is absolutely useless. They assigned me a public defender, Zuri. A public defender. He is some exhausted kid right out of law school carrying 100 cases. He does not understand the first thing about complex corporate financial structures or commercial loan framing. He told me I should just take a plea deal for 7 years. 7 years, Zuri. I will literally die in here before my sentence is up. I let his frantic words hang in the air. He was entirely consumed by his own suffering, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the sole architect of his own destruction. He even tried to shift the blame. It was all Bradley's fault, Marcus stammered, grasping at straws. Bradley manipulated me, and my mother pushed me to keep up appearances. They made me do it, Zuri. You know how my mother is. I know exactly how your mother is, I countered coldly. And I know you chose to sell your soul to impress a white scammer just to secure a seat at the country club. I know you have money now, Marcus pleaded, shifting his tone from panicked to deeply manipulative. The local news says your accounting firm is booming. You took all my former high net worth clients. You have the capital, Zuri. You have millions rolling in right now. I am begging you to liquidate some of your business assets and hire a top-tier criminal defense attorney for me. You know all the best legal sharks in Georgia. You could easily hire a team that knows how to dismantle a federal indictment. You owe me that much. We were married. I am the father of the child you are carrying. You cannot just leave the father of your baby to rot in a federal penitentiary. The absolute audacity of his request was staggering. After everything he had done, after trying to forge my signature to steal my business, after attempting to frame me for federal crimes so he could marry a white politician daughter, he actually believed I owed him my hard-earned money to save his miserable life. Marcus, I said, slicing through his pathetic rant, with a tone so chillingly calm it stopped him dead in his tracks. I want you to close your eyes and picture the master bathroom of the Buckhead mansion. I want you to remember the exact morning I handed you the positive pregnancy test. Silence fell over the jailhouse phone line. The background noise of slamming cell doors and shouting inmates faded into insignificance. You did not look at me with love. Marcus, I continued, carefully articulating every single syllable so they would burn permanently into his memory. You looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You raised your hand and you slapped me across the face with so much brutal force that I crashed onto the cold marble floor. I was carrying your child and you struck me down without a single second of hesitation. Do you remember what you screamed at me while I was bleeding on the floor? Zuri. I was stressed, he whimpered weakly, a pathetic attempt at a cowardly defense. I was out of my mind with the corporate merger. You screamed that a baby would hold you back from greatness, I stated, quoting his exact vile words back to him. You screamed that I was going to ruin your corporate merger and drag you down from the highest tier of society. You wanted to be free of me and our child so you could climb the social ladder with Bradley and your fake high society friends. You wanted absolute unencumbered freedom at any cost. I let out a soft, dark laugh that echoed through the receiver. Well, Marcus, look at you now, I declared, delivering the final devastating blow. You are completely unburdened by a wife. You are entirely single. You are free from the heavy responsibilities of fatherhood. And you are wearing a bright orange jumpsuit in a maximum security cell block. You finally achieved your maximum potential. You got exactly the life you asked for. Zuri, please, no! Marcus shrieked, his voice breaking into a guttural, hysterical sob. Please do not do this. Do not leave me here. You are the only one who can save me. My mother is bankrupt. Bradley is locked up. I have absolutely nobody left. Zuri. I reached out and pressed my finger firmly against the glowing red button on my desk phone console. The call disconnected instantly, cutting off his pathetic wailing mid-sentence. The heavy silence of my luxurious office rushed back in, wrapping around me like a warm, protective blanket. I picked up my personal cell phone from the desk and navigated to my contact list. I found his name. I clicked the block caller option, confirming the selection with a definitive tap. Then I hit delete. His name, his number, and his entire digital footprint vanished from my device completely. The emotional cord that had tethered me to his abuse was permanently and irreversibly severed. I was finally completely free. The days that followed Marcus calling from the county jail moved with a blazing, undeniable momentum. I did not sit in my apartment mourning a marriage that was nothing but a transactional illusion. I went straight to work. The media circus surrounding the country club crypto crash had inadvertently become the greatest marketing campaign in the history of the Atlanta financial district. The wealthy investors who had pulled their portfolios from Marcus' former banking firm needed a new harbor. They wanted the forensic accountant who was brilliant enough to dismantle a $12 million Ponzi scheme from the inside without leaving a single fingerprint on the blast radius. Within 48 hours, my office phone lines were completely jammed. Prominent black surgeons, real estate developers, and local politicians were practically begging my firm to audit their entire financial histories. They wanted to know if they were vulnerable, and they were willing to pay premium retainer fees for my absolute discretion and unmatched precision. When the senior partners at Marcus' former firm tried to issue public statements distancing themselves from his crimes, they inadvertently confirmed that my audit was the sole reason the federal authorities caught the laundering operation before it drained the firm's entire reserve. That admission was worth its weight in gold. The very same old money Atlanta families who had attended Gwendolyn charity galas, who had sneered at my working-class roots while sipping champagne, now sat in my waiting room. They brought me their massive portfolios begging for my protective oversight. I did not turn them away. I charged them an exorbitant premium for my services. I made sure every contract they signed with my firm came with an airtight non-disclosure agreement and a hefty retainer fee cleared up front. Every time a new multi-million-dollar account transferred to my firm, I felt a deep poetic justice. I was taking the wealth they had previously entrusted to the men who abused me, and I was using it to build my own impenetrable fortress. I took over an entire new floor in my midtown high-rise. I hired 6 new senior accountants, doubling my operational capacity in less than a month. I watched my business valuations skyrocket past any projection I had ever made for myself. Marcus had tried to steal my company and hand it to a white scammer. Instead, his spectacular failure acted as rocket fuel for my empire. My firm was no longer just a respected accounting agency. It was the absolute gold standard for financial security in Georgia. As the revenue poured in, I realized that building personal wealth was not enough to satisfy the fire that had been ignited inside me. I thought about the younger version of myself, sitting in the lecture halls of Howard University, trying to map out a future in a corporate world dominated by men who looked like Bradley and black men who sought their approval like Marcus. I knew exactly how easy it was for ambitious black women to be targeted by financial predators posing as supportive partners. I decided to turn my survival into a systematic weapon against financial abuse. I established a comprehensive mentorship and training program entirely funded by my firm. I named it the Vanguard Initiative. I specifically recruited brilliant young African American women graduating from HBCUs across the country. Twice a week, I cleared my schedule entirely to sit in our executive boardroom with 20 young black women. I shared my personal story without sugarcoating the brutal realities. I explained how Marcus used a fake tax disclosure document to try and steal my life work. I walked them through the specific chemical composition of the vanishing ink I used to outsmart him. I wanted them to understand that protecting their assets required continuous vigilance and ruthless strategy. We ran simulations on offshore account tracing. We analyzed post-nuptial agreements designed to trap the unwary. I taught them how to identify the subtle red flags of financial coercion in personal relationships. I showed them how to lock down their credit, how to structure ironclad trusts, and how to legally insulate their hard-earned money from narcissistic partners who might view their success as a threat or a bankroll. I watched these young women transform from cautious graduates into fierce strategic operators. I was building an absolute army of financially lethal women who would never be forced to cower in a bathroom while an arrogant man threatened their livelihood. No man would ever be able to use a fake black card or an Ivy League degree to intimidate them into surrendering their power. We were creating a new standard for black wealth in the South, one built on absolute transparency and legal fortitude. My pregnancy progressed beautifully alongside my expanding business. The stress that had constantly radiated through my body while living in the Buckhead mansion was entirely gone. My blood pressure normalized. I slept deeply every single night. I decorated my new nursery with vibrant colors and rich textures, a space dedicated entirely to peace and unconditional love. I surrounded myself with a chosen family of colleagues, mentors, and friends who celebrated my fierce independence instead of demanding I shrink myself to make them comfortable. I had cut the rot out of my life, and the soil was finally healthy enough to bloom. 6 months had passed since the chaotic night at the Peachtree Elite Country Club. The leaves in Atlanta began to turn brilliant shades of gold and crimson, marking the final transition into winter and the closing of the legal storm. I was sitting at my marble desk reviewing a particularly complex corporate merger for a new client when the heavy glass door of my office swung open. Isaiah walked in looking sharper than ever in a custom-tailored midnight blue suit. He did not knock and he did not greet my assistant. He bypassed the small talk entirely. His face was a mask of professional satisfaction, a look he only wore when a long, grueling hunt was officially over. He carried a thick, pristine manila envelope under his right arm. He walked directly to my desk and dropped the heavy envelope right on top of my open financial files. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet office. He tapped his index finger twice against the sealed flap. "The federal judge just brought the gavel down," Isaiah announced, his deep voice resonating with absolute finality. The sentencing hearings for the Apex Holdings wire fraud and embezzlement conspiracy concluded 20 minutes ago. The Department of Justice did not hold back. I brought you the official sealed court transcripts straight from the clerk office. It is time to see exactly how many years your ex-husband and his favorite brother-in-law are going to spend wearing those bright orange jumpsuits. Let us see what the cost of their arrogance truly is. Isaiah broke the heavy red wax seal on the manila envelope with his thumb. He slid the thick stack of federal transcripts across the cool surface of my marble desk. A quiet professional satisfaction radiated from him, knowing we had executed the perfect legal takedown against people who thought they were entirely untouchable. The crisp white pages detailed the absolute decimation of the men who thought they could use my name, my hard work, and my unblemished record to build a criminal empire. I picked up the heavy document, feeling the weight of my victory, and began scanning the final judgments, reading the exact moment the federal judge brought the heavy wooden gavel down on Bradley. The judge did not show a single ounce of leniency for the white crypto investor who had spent years defrauding Atlanta prominent black leaders. The court transcripts painted a pathetic picture of a man who suddenly realized his privilege could not save him from federal mandatory minimums. Bradley was officially convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and grand embezzlement. The transcript noted that Bradley actually cried openly in the courtroom, begging the judge for house arrest, claiming his fragile mental health could not survive the harsh realities of a federal penitentiary. He desperately tried to blame the pressure of high society expectations, but the judge was completely unmoved by his crocodile tears. The gavel came down hard. Bradley was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The man who bragged about his generational wealth and openly mocked my family background was now reduced to a standard federal inmate number, destined to spend the next decade and a half locked in a tiny concrete cell, surrounded by the very people he used to despise and manipulate. I turned the page to read Marcus' final judgment. My former husband had tried every trick in the legal playbook to reduce his sentence. The transcript showed he blamed Bradley for leading him astray, he blamed the toxic corporate banking culture, and he even tried to claim he was operating under immense emotional distress due to our failing marriage. But the federal prosecutors had my flawless digital evidence proving Marcus actively forged my signature and enthusiastically participated in the theft to elevate his own social status. The judge delivered a scathing reprimand, calling his actions a profound betrayal of his profession, his prestigious education, and his entire community. The gavel came down on Marcus with a devastating sentence of 7 years in federal prison as a primary co-conspirator. 7 years. He would lose his youth, his earning potential, and every shred of his precious social standing. By the time Marcus walked out of those heavily guarded prison gates, he would be a disgraced, middle-aged felon with absolutely zero prospects in the financial sector. He had traded his marriage, his unborn child, and his freedom just for a fleeting chance to impress a white scammer who ended up dragging him straight into the abyss. But the prison sentences were only half of the justice served. The massive financial restitution completely destroyed the women who had actively enabled the abuse, cheering on the men while looking down on everyone else. I flipped to the asset forfeiture schedules at the back of the packet to see the true damage. Jada was hit the hardest. Because Bradley had legally placed all the fraudulent shell companies under her social security number to avoid federal scrutiny, the government held her completely liable for the $12 million deficit. Jada was forced to declare. Chapter 7 Bankruptcy, instantly liquidating every single asset she possessed to her name. The federal agents had seized her luxury vehicles, her Cartier jewelry, and her massive designer wardrobe right out of her closets. Just yesterday, my assistant showed me a photograph circulating on several Atlanta high society gossip blogs. The picture showed Jada wearing a poorly fitted, greasy polyester uniform, working the drive-through window at a local discount grocery store in the deep suburbs. The former socialite who used to boast about her exclusive country club memberships and look down her nose at working-class women was now handing out cheap paper bags and taking minimum wage orders just to survive the crushing wage garnishments the court imposed on her. The blogs noted she tried to hide her face behind a visor when former country club acquaintances drove up to the window to order food, but the humiliation was absolute and highly public. She had absolutely nowhere to run. Her entire fake identity had been repossessed, leaving her with nothing but the devastating reality of her selfish choices. Then there was Gwendolyn, the proud, haughty church choir director who had handed me a business card for an abortion clinic and called my bloodline inferior. Without Bradley's stolen money and Marcus' lucrative banking salary, Gwendolyn was completely destitute. The 24-hour eviction I executed on her beloved Buckhead mansion had finalized her social execution. According to the court records updating her permanent residency status for the ongoing fraud monitoring, Gwendolyn was now living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a run-down, dangerous neighborhood on the far south side of the city. It was the exact type of working-class neighborhood she used to mock me for coming from. She had no grand parlor to host her superficial friends, no fake pearls to wear to Sunday service, and no false legacy to hide behind. She was completely isolated, forced to live out her remaining years in the harsh poverty she so deeply despised. She now had to listen to police sirens at night instead of classical music, fighting to pay her utility bills with whatever meager assistance she could scrape together, while the elite society she worshipped pretended she never existed. I closed the thick legal file and handed it back to Isaiah with a slow, grateful nod, thanking him for his relentless dedication to uncovering the truth. A profound, satisfying peace settled over my modern office, erasing the last traces of anxiety I had carried for months. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the vibrant city below, feeling the steady, strong kick of my baby, reminding me of the beautiful, secure future we were building together. The universe had achieved perfect balance. The wicked had been stripped of their false idols. That profound sense of absolute justice carried me smoothly through the crisp winter months and straight into the vibrant, breathtaking bloom of an Atlanta spring. I stood perfectly still in the center of the grand foyer of the Buckhead mansion. The heavy, oppressive energy that used to choke the very life out of this expansive space was completely eradicated. Gwendolyn had originally decorated this entire estate to look like a dusty, neglected European museum. She desperately wanted the architecture to reflect a fabricated aristocratic lineage, heavily reliant on dark mahogany wood, stifling heavy velvet drapes, and suffocating crystal chandeliers. It was a physical manifestation of her tragic need for white validation. It was designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the front doors. I did not just buy the house to evict her, I bought it to cleanse it. I hired a premier team of Black female contractors and visionary architects to completely gut the entire first floor. We aggressively tore down the restrictive walls that separated the formal dining room from the living spaces, creating a massive, breathtaking open-concept layout. I replaced the dark, imposing oil paintings of stiff, unsmiling European aristocrats with vibrant, contemporary African-American art. I commissioned massive, colorful canvases from local artists right here in Atlanta, showcasing the beauty, the unyielding joy, and the raw resilience of Black women. The heavy velvet curtains were thrown out into the trash and replaced with sheer linen panels that allowed the warm, natural Georgia sunlight to flood across the newly polished hardwood floors. The house finally knew how to breathe. It was no longer a cold monument to toxic elitism. It was a living, breathing sanctuary of authentic Black wealth and unabashed joy. I walked slowly up the grand, sweeping staircase, resting my hand lightly on the smooth, polished railing. My baby bump was wonderfully prominent now, a beautiful, heavy reminder of the fierce life growing inside me. Every single step I took felt like a deliberate victory lap. I vividly remembered the days I used to walk up these very stairs, feeling incredibly small, feeling constantly judged, feeling like an unwanted intruder in a fortress explicitly designed to keep me out. Gwendolyn used to stand right at the top landing, looking down at me with absolute disgust, crossing her arms as she criticized my natural hair or my practical clothes. Now my custom designer heels clicked sharply against the fresh hardwood, echoing triumphantly through an estate that I owned outright, completely free and clear of any bank leverage. I reached the end of the bright hallway and pushed open the heavy double doors to the master suite. This specific room used to be the epicenter of Marcus and Gwendolyn and their boundless arrogance. It was the exact room where they whispered about my working-class roots, where Marcus hid his encrypted hard drives, and where they callously plotted my financial and emotional ruin. I had completely and thoroughly eradicated their memory from the space. I transformed their dark, imposing master bedroom into the most spectacular, expansive nursery imaginable. The walls were painted a warm, soothing terracotta, and a breathtaking hand-painted mural of a lush, vibrant savanna stretched majestically across the high ceiling. I filled the custom-built bookshelves lining the walls with stories of brilliant Black scientists, courageous leaders, and visionary artists. I wanted my child to grow up surrounded by powerful narratives of empowerment and objective truth, not the shallow social climbing fairy tales Marcus and Jada were fed to keep them compliant. A beautiful handcrafted solid mahogany crib stood right in the center of the room, bathed in a pool of warm afternoon sunlight. I walked over and gently ran my fingertips along the smooth, rich wood. I had successfully secured a future where my child would never have to shrink themselves to fit into a room. They would simply own the room. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the meticulously manicured lawns and the towering ancient oak trees that line the perimeter of the Buckhead property. For generations, this specific neighborhood had been a heavily guarded stronghold of old money and systemic exclusion. Gwendolyn truly believed the only way to survive here was to mimic the oppressors, to punch down on people like me, to desperately prove she belonged among the elite. She traded her soul and her integrity for a fake string of pearls and a fragile seat at a table that was actively trying to destroy her. I did the exact opposite. I brought my authentic working-class resilience, my brilliant Howard University education, and my unshakable moral compass right through the front iron gates. I did not ask for a seat at their table. I bought the entire estate and I built a brand new table. The profound quiet of the mansion was a luxury I savored every single day. There were no more passive-aggressive comments over Sunday dinner. There were no more manipulative text messages arriving late at night or forged financial documents waiting on my desk. The air in my home was entirely clean. The toxic roots of that family had been pulled up from the ground and burned to ash. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling a strong rhythmic kick from my baby. I smiled a deep, genuine smile, knowing that the protective barrier I built around us was absolutely impenetrable. No one would ever make us feel like we were not enough. The peaceful silence of the afternoon was suddenly broken by a bright, cheerful melody. The newly installed smart doorbell chimed, echoing warmly and invitingly through the expansive hallways. I checked the high-definition security monitor mounted discreetly on the nursery wall. I did not see the sneering faces of toxic in-laws or arrogant crypto investors demanding entry. I saw a vibrant, beautiful crowd of brilliant, successful Black women, my closest friends, my loyal colleagues from the accounting firm, and the powerful mentors who had stood by me unconditionally during the darkest days of the federal investigation were all gathered on my front porch. They were carrying brightly wrapped gifts, massive bouquets of fresh flowers, and trays of catered food. It was time for my baby shower. It was not a stiff, performative country club event designed to impress corrupt politicians. It was a genuine celebration of life hosted by women who truly loved and fiercely supported me. I turned away from the window, ready to open my doors and welcome my real family inside. I pulled open the very heavy double doors, and the sound of pure, unadulterated joy spilled into the foyer. My closest friends poured into the house, bringing a wave of warmth that completely banished the last lingering ghosts of this sprawling estate. I had hired a premier culinary team of Black female chefs from downtown Atlanta to cater the event. They set up a magnificent spread in the dining room, elevating traditional Southern soul food to a spectacular fine dining standard. The music was vibrant and soulful, a curated mix of classic rhythm and blues and modern neo-soul that had my guests swaying and smiling the moment they walked across the threshold. This was not a stiff, performative networking event disguised as a family celebration. Nobody was whispering malicious gossip behind crystal champagne flutes or checking social media to validate their self-worth. Everyone in this room was entirely, truly authentic. The women who filled my home were powerful, resilient, and deeply genuine. These incredible women were my chosen family now. Isaiah walked through the doorway carrying a massive gift box wrapped in bright gold paper and tied with an elegant emerald ribbon. He gave me a firm, protective hug, his usual stoic investigator demeanor replaced by a wide, genuine smile. He pulled back and looked around the brightly lit foyer, nodding in absolute approval at the massive transformation of the space. He leaned in close over the music and told me that the federal prosecutors had officially closed the final ledger on Apex Holdings. Just this morning, the court-ordered restitution distributions were successfully hitting the bank accounts of the defrauded community members, restoring the wealth that Bradley and Marcus had so callously stolen. The legal nightmare was completely legally and permanently finished. I looked at Isaiah and thanked him from the bottom of my heart for being the ruthless sword I needed when I was too busy building my impenetrable shield. As I moved through the expansive living room, the young women from my Vanguard initiative surrounded me. These were the brilliant Howard and Spelman graduates I mentored, the young Black women I was personally training to be financial assassins in the corporate world. They brought beautifully handcrafted gifts and classic children books for the nursery. One of the young women took my hand and told me that because of my mentorship, she had just secured her first commercial property completely, independent of any bank loans or male co-signers. Listening to them talk about their rising careers, their locked-down financial portfolios, and their fierce, unshakable independence filled me with an overwhelming sense of pride. They were the ultimate living revenge against men like Marcus. I was looking at an entire generation of women who could never be manipulated financially, abused, or intimidated into shrinking themselves. As the lively afternoon slowly shifted into early evening, the golden hour sunlight began to bathe the renovated mansion in a stunning amber glow. The sheer linen curtains caught the gentle breeze from the open patio doors. I stepped away from the center of the main gathering for a brief, quiet moment, retreating to the edge of the grand living room to simply take it all in. I held a tall crystal flute filled with crisp, sparkling apple cider, feeling the cool, smooth glass against my palm. The room was ringing with loud, rich, beautiful laughter. I looked at the vibrant contemporary art on the walls, the comfortable modern furniture, and the absolute unquestionable safety of the sanctuary I had created from the ashes of my trauma. I thought back to the horrific morning in the master bathroom. I remembered the blinding physical pain of the slap, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, and the crushing realization that my husband viewed my pregnancy as a catastrophic burden. I remembered Gwendolyn tossing that designer ice pack at my head and demanding I erase my own future to protect her fake high society image. They truly believed that breaking me down physically and emotionally would guarantee their success. They thought I was a stepping stone they could easily crush into the dirt. Suddenly, I felt a powerful, distinct kick against my ribs. It was the strongest movement my baby had made, yet a sharp physical reminder of the fierce life that was mere weeks away from joining this world. I placed my free hand over my belly, feeling the solid warmth of my own skin through my couture gown. The baby shifted again, moving with a strong, undeniable vitality. I looked down, closing my eyes for a fraction of a second, and whispered the words that had become my ultimate daily mantra. They tried to erase us so they could shine. I whispered softly to my unborn child, making sure the words carried the full weight of my unyielding love. But they forgot that pressure does not crush diamonds, it creates them. You will be born into an empire of truth, and no one will ever make you feel like you are not enough. I opened my eyes and looked back out at the magnificent room. I raised my glass of sparkling cider in a silent private toast to the incredible women laughing together, to the resilient ancestors who gave me my unshakable strength, and to the beautiful unbroken future waiting just ahead. I smiled radiantly, letting the sheer magnitude of my total victory wash over me completely. I had not just survived the fire, I had learned how to control the flames. The camera of my mind pulled back, capturing the radiant golden light, the vibrant, joyous colors, and the absolute peace of a woman who had won the ultimate war. The beautiful, triumphant scene slowly fades to perfect black. Sometimes the hardest slap you take is not meant to break you. It is meant to wake up the lioness sleeping inside. Have you ever had to use sheer, calculated silence to destroy the people who thought they broke you? The ultimate lesson from this story is that true power lies in silent and strategic preparation rather than loud, emotional reactions. When toxic family members constantly underestimate your intelligence and weaponize their privilege against you, do not shrink to make them feel comfortable. Instead, channel that pain into building an impenetrable fortress of financial and emotional independence. Your greatest revenge is not matching their cruelty, but achieving absolute success that renders their opinions completely irrelevant forever. You alone are the brilliant architect of your own destiny. Hit the like button and subscribe if you are ready to reclaim your power.